Do people make fish sick? Art Linkletter was a popular TV personality. In one show, he asked a young boy what his favorite Bible story was. The boy answered, Jonah and the whale. Then Art asked what the boy thought the lesson of that story was. The boy answered, people make fish sick. You know that's not right, but what would your answer have been? You see, that Old Testament book, that little Old Testament book, has some really good lessons for us. You've heard the story of Jonah, but have you read that little book recently? It's less than 50 verses long, about 3 pages in my Bible. I'm going to use it to show you how I study the Bible. I start Bible study with a simple prayer. Here it is. God, open my eyes. Then I read the text. It doesn't take much time to read Jonah. I can read it in about 7.5 minutes. So I started studying Jonah by reading it several times, seeing what it says. I got familiar with it. I read it to find out what it says. Afterwards, I started processing it, to learn it. I studied it to learn what it means, not just what it says. Here's some of what I did. I asked the text. That's what I said. I asked the text, who? Who's in the story? The answer, Jonah, the men on the ship, some men on the shore, a Gentile king and his subjects, the Ninevites. And I wondered, what was the when? The answer to when came from my Ryrie Study Bible. It was about 430 BC. The details of where came from my study Bible too. Jonah ran away from God by boat from the shores of the Mediterranean. He went toward what was probably southern Spain. Then God took him to Nineveh, a vicious and evil city in Assyria. Nineveh was located on the banks of the Tigris River, outside of modern Mosul in northern Iraq. For what happened, I looked carefully at the 4 chapters of Jonah. I looked at the text. There was a storm on the sea, and a great sea creature swallowed Jonah. It could have been a whale or a shark. And I found a fast-growing plant and a worm in the story as well. So what happened? Well, God told Jonah to take a message of judgment to Nineveh, but Jonah ran away from God and ran away from his assignment. Then God brought him back, starting with a treacherous storm. In spite of Jonah's silence and disobedience, the men of the ship put their faith in God. And to calm the storm, at Jonah's request, they threw him overboard. The sea calmed, and a sea creature, appointed by God, not created, but appointed by God, swallowed Jonah. Miraculously, he survived for 3 days. And in that fish, that whale or that shark, Jonah prayed his way back to God. He was in that creature's dark, wet belly. Then coming close to shore, it vomited Jonah up onto the dry eastern shore of the Mediterranean. That's why the boy told Art that people make fish sick. From the text, there must have been some men on the shore, because Jonah's wail of a testimony was a sign to the Ninevites. I wonder what Jonah looked like, and I wonder what he smelled like at that point. Then Jonah went inland to Nineveh, and he delivered his warning of God's impending judgment, and everyone in the city repented and believed. They all believed. And then it says, God changed his mind and didn't destroy them. But Jonah wasn't pleased. He was unhappy, and he went to the suburbs to sulk. He knew God was gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness. You see, Jonah knew that God loved the Ninevites more than he did. So, God took Jonah to school. God appointed a plant to grow up to shade Jonah from the hot sun. And Jonah was happy, very happy about the plant. Then God sent a worm to kill the plant. That exposed Jonah to the heat of the sun and the scorching east wind. Jonah was extremely unhappy. So God and Jonah had a short, convicting conversation. God said to Jonah, "Do you have good reason to be angry about the plant?" And he, Jonah, said, "I have good reason to be angry, even to death." Then the Lord said, "You had compassion on the plant for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city?" With that, the story of Jonah abruptly came to an end. In studying Jonah, I also titled each of the 4 chapters. That helps me study. In this case, titling those chapters was easy. Here are some possibilities. Chapter 1, Jonah was in the ship. Chapter 2, he's in the whale. Chapter 3, he's in the city. Chapter 4, in the suburbs. In the ship, in the whale, in the city, in the suburbs. Here's another. Jonah runs away from God. Jonah runs back to God. Jonah runs with God, and then he runs ahead of God. And one more. Jonah said, "I won't go," then "I will go," then "I'm here," and finally, "I wished I'd never come." And I titled the whole book of Jonah. Here's my title: The Cold-Hearted Prophet and the Loving God. I might have titled the book of Jonah as The God of Second Chances. That's certainly a theme in the book. The sailors, the Ninevites, and even Jonah got a second chance. But I decided against that title because of the overall context. My study Bible told me that a few generations later, the Ninevites went back to their evil ways, and God judged them harshly. He destroyed them, as recorded in the book of the prophet Nahum. As it says in the beginning of Nahum, "The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished." You see, apparently the Ninevites didn't pass their faith down to their children and grandchildren. Well, as far as further context goes, from my study Bible, Jonah was a real person and a real prophet. That's from 2 Kings 14, verse 25. And Jesus himself referred to Jonah as factual in Matthew 12, verses 39 to 41. You see, the story of Jonah is real. It's not fictional. This Just a Question has been a short example of how I study the Bible. I followed the first 3 steps of good Bible study. I prayed, I read, and I studied. You see, I wanted to show you that there's more to the story of Jonah than people making fish sick. But there's a 4th step. That 4th step is to live it. So I asked myself, and the text, how can I or someone else make this little book part of my life or part of their life? Well, part of your life. So, skeptic, seeker, God is loving and compassionate, and don't be turned off by silent or reluctant Christians like Jonah. God wants you to come to faith. That's why he gives 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and even more chances. However, there is a limit, as seen from the book of Nahum. Come to faith in Jesus while you still have the chance. In the 911god.org video, I'll show you how to do that. And believer, are you a reluctant witness? One of the toughest questions I was ever asked was, if what you're telling me is true, why are you the first person to ever tell me? Are you a reluctant witness? The book of Jonah ends abruptly with its penetrating question. So I'll end this Just a Question the same way, with one penetrating question. Here it is. Believer, does God love your friends, family, and neighbors more than you do? I'm John Morris. I'll see you on the next Just a Question.